Welcome. In this video, we're going to be going over the examples in Lesson 10 of Module 2 for Grade 7. In Example 1, we're talking about products of a positive integer and a negative integer. Up until now, we've talked about adding and subtracting integers, positive and negative numbers, and now we're going to look at what happens when we add repeatedly the same value. That's what multiplying is, adding the same thing over and over again. Let's start in part A by choosing 4 cards. I'm going to choose a 3, a -2, a -5, and a 4. Now if you want to follow along with some different numbers, you can. Just make sure that this number is a negative number. Otherwise, you can use the same number as I did. If you notice, the -5 has a star underneath it. We're going to copy that value, the -5, 3 times. So in part B here, we're going to put all the other values down, but we're going to deal with this -5 here 3 times. So we have a 3, a -2, I'm moving the 4 to here, and then these 3 cards will be -5. In the next part, we're going to use these cards from part B to talk about what this value, this -5 3 times, does to us. If we were to treat this like a normal game, we'd add 3 plus -2 plus 4, and we'd start out with that total being 5. And then if we look at these 3 -5s, we would be adding -5 3 times. That's the product that describes these 3 matching cards. Adding -5 3 times is like multiplying it by 3. So we have 3 times -5. If I talk about how each of these cards changed my score, well, negative means it's going to decrease. So adding a -5 decreases my score by that 3 times. If I think about an expression using addition that it would do that, I'd have -5 plus -5 plus -5. Now, these 2 expressions give me the same value. Remember, repeatedly adding something is like multiplying it. So since I added the -5 3 times, I get 3 times -5. Now, if I think about decreasing my score by 5 3 times, that means the total is going to be decreasing my score by -15, or decreasing it by 15. If we want to write an equation that relates the product, 3 times -5, to how it affects my score, decreasing it by 15, this is the expression I get. 3 times -5 equals -15. We've just gone through a proof that allows us to prove that a positive number times a negative number gives us a negative answer. All right, let's take a look at another example and see if we can come up with some similar results. In part C of example 1, we're going to choose 4 new cards. Got a -1, a 5, a -3, and a 4. Now this 4, we're going to be duplicating it a bunch of times. See how there's a star here, and I've got a star underneath each of these boxes? I'm going to put the -1 here, the 5, the -3, and then each of these 5 boxes are going to have a 4 in them. We're going to use these cards to answer the questions down here. First, we're going to write a product. Remember, that means multiply, a multiplication problem that describes the 5 matching cards. Well, here are my 5 matching cards. They're all 4s. That's like 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, or 5 times 4. And if I want to write an expression that represents how each of the star cards changes my score, well, adding 4 is going to increase my score 5 times. So that's going to be 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. Now if I want to relate these 2 expressions, they're equal to each other. We know that multiplying 4 times 5 is the same as adding 4 together 5 times. Now we want to write an integer that represents the total change to your score by the 5 star cards. Well, each time I add 4, my score increases by 4. And if I increase it by 4 or 5 times, I get 20. Well, 5 times 4, we all know that that's 20. So 5 times 4 equals 20. Now we're going to use the expression 5 times 4 to relate the multiplication of a positive value card to addition. Well, multiplication of a positive value card, 5 times 4, is the same as 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, which equals 20. Now we can say that multiplying a positive integer card is repeated addition of the positive integer card and increases your score, because the number we get when we multiply 5 times 4 is 20, a positive number. If we look at the same idea with 3 times negative 5, right, and we want to relate that multiplication of a negative value card to addition, we can say that 3 times negative 5 is like adding negative 5 together 3 times, and we get negative 15. So we can say that multiplying a negative integer card is a repeated addition of the negative integer card and decreases your score. In this case, it takes it down by 15. So we've looked at what happens when we multiply a positive number by a positive number and a positive number by a negative number. Let's take a look at an example of what happens when we have a negative integer and a positive integer. In example 2, if all of the 4s from this hand are discarded, remember discarded means that we're taking them out of our hand, how would the score be affected? Well, we've been using a negative sign to show discard. So if I have take away 4, take away 4, take away 4, that means that I am subtracting this 4 3 times. So the score would decrease by 4 3 times in a row for a total decrease of 12 points. That means taking away 3 times, that's where this negative 3 comes from. I discarded it 3 times, and the number I'm discarding is the 4, will decrease my score by 12, or gives me a negative 12. Part B says what 3 matching cards would be added to this picture to get the same change in score. Well, here's the equation from above. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. And I could say to get the same change in score, I could add 3 negative 4s. So if I took 3 more cards and they were all negative 4, I would still decrease my score by 12. So if I want to relate the products, I can say that both negative 3 times 4 and 3 times negative 4 are equal to each other. Adding a value multiple times has the same result as removing the opposite value the same number of times. So if I add negative 4 3 times, that's the same as removing a positive 4 3 times. We're going to keep talking about this in class, but we've got to get used to this language of adding and removing and increasing and decreasing. In our last example, we're going to take at what happens when we have 2 negative integers, then we multiply them together. In this hand, I have 4 negative 2's along with a negative 3 and a 1. If I discard my negative 2's, we want to see what happens to my score. Well, if I take a negative card out of my hand, it goes up. So if I discard a negative 2 from the set of cards, it increases by 2, and removing all 4 of the negative 2 cards causes the score to increase by 2 4 times. That gives me a total increase of 8. So negative 4 times negative 2 equals 8. This means that if I discard my negative 2 4 times, that's what negative 4 means, and the negative 2 is the thing that I'm getting rid of, my score goes up by 8. If I had to pick 4 matching cards that I could add to here that would make my score go up by 8, I could choose the opposite of negative 2. That would be positive 2. An increase of 8 could come from adding 4 positive 2's to the cards shown. So 4 times 2 is positive 8. If you look, both of these examples gave us the same answer. They both gave us positive 8, or an increase in our score by 8. I could relate these two together. Right? Negative 4 times negative 2 is the same as 4 times 2. Adding a value multiple times has the same effect as removing the opposite value the same number of times. That's kind of what we said before. So it doesn't matter whether we start with positive or negatives. If we change the sign of the first number in a product, then we change the sign, and we change the sign of the second number in the product, we get the same answer. So looking at these two, we can talk about some rules we can use for multiplying integers. The product of two integers is equal to the product of their opposites. Removing two negative 4s is the same as adding two positive 4s. Adding three negative 5s is the same as removing three negative 5s. Here are some examples in numbers. Negative 4 times negative 5 is the same as 4 times 5. Negative 2 times positive 7 is the same as positive 2 times negative 7. See how we reversed the sign for both of these? And positive 6 times negative 4 is the same as negative 6 times positive 4. We're going to put some rules in our interactive notebook that says if you multiply two products or two numbers that have the same sign, you get a positive answer. And if you multiply two numbers that have opposite signs, you get a negative answer. And we'll talk about that in class and then some more in the next video. Make sure you have everything organized and come to class with all of your homework done. See you then.